The tires of my black SUV crunched against the perfect white gravel of Alderwood Estates, the kind of gated community where every mailbox matched, lawns gleamed like golf courses, and smiles were rehearsed in front of mirrors. It was my first time here, at least that's what they thought. The iron gate slid open slowly, the guard giving me a polite nod. I smiled back, not because I wanted to, but because I'd learned that in places like this, smiling is camouflage. It parked in front of a 2-story house that screamed, approved by committee. No personality whatsoever. Just as I stepped out, I could already feel the neighborhood's eyes peering from behind lace curtains. The HOA patrol truck rolled up within minutes, right on schedule. A man with a clipboard and too much confidence stepped out. "Morning, ma'am," he said, puffing out his chest. "I'm Greg, HOA compliance officer. We like to greet newcomers early, make sure everyone understands the community standards." "Of course," I replied, resting my hands casually on the hood of my car. "I appreciate that." He flipped through a stack of papers. "Let's see, your moving truck is still parked on the main road? That's a violation. Heavy vehicles can't stay more than 15 minutes. I glanced at my watch. 14 minutes. The corners of my lips twitched. "Really? I just arrived." "Exactly," he said, giving a thin smile. "That's why I'm here, to help you avoid a fine." I could feel the arrogance radiating off him. It wasn't the rule that mattered, it was the control. I'd seen this before, same tone, different zip code. "Thank you," I said evenly. "I'll make sure the truck moves." He scribbled something on his pad. "Good. Now a few reminders. Lawn height must remain under 4 inches, exterior paint colors must be pre-approved, and satellite dishes are prohibited. We also recommend joining the Community Improvement Fund, voluntary, but expected." I raised an eyebrow. Voluntary and expected. Interesting combination. He chuckled. "It's just how we keep the neighborhood premium." Premium. That word again. The illusion of quality wrapped around control. I gave him a polite nod and watched him leave, clipboard swinging like a badge of power. What Greg didn't know was that I'd already spent 2 months reviewing this HOA's financials, quietly, through shell corporations and proxies. And this morning wasn't my arrival as a resident. It was my arrival as their landlord. The next few hours were a show. Neighbors pretending not to stare, a welcome committee dropping off a basket of organic fruit, a woman named Janice reminding me about recycling bins and noise hours. I smiled, thanked them all, and played my part. Every welcome was laced with curiosity. Who is she? Where did she get the money? Is she single? I let them wonder. By evening, I walked down to the lake behind the houses, Alderwood's prized view. The sunset shimmered across the water, and the reflection of the manicured homes looked like a painting trying too hard to be perfect. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my private notes. Alderwood HOA, delinquent on property taxes for 5 years. Primary lender, Vantage Creek Development Corporation subsidiary, mine. I smiled softly. Soon, they'll realize the ground beneath their perfect lawns already belongs to me. The next morning, I woke to a knock on my door. Greg again, this time with another board member, Susan, mid-50s, sharp bob, pearls, and that I run the PDA kind of smile. "Morning again," Greg said. "You see, your front bushes aren't in the standard shape. We require all residents to maintain uniform aesthetics. Ovals, not cubes." "Ovals," I repeated. "I see. Also," she added, lowering her voice, "we noticed your car doesn't have a community decal. You'll need to purchase one from us. It's $45. For a sticker? It shows you're part of the family," Greg said, smiling proudly. I tilted my head. "And if I don't buy it?" Greg's smile froze. "Then you'll receive a notice, and possibly a fine." I let silence hang for a beat, then nodded slowly. "Of course. I'll think about it." They left, clearly satisfied they'd educated the new girl that I watched them drive off, the HOA logo glinting on their truck door, a logo that would soon legally belong to me. That night, I sat at my desk and reviewed the acquisition paperwork one more time. My lawyer had sent confirmation hours earlier. Transfer of property rights finalized. Alderwood HOA now under the umbrella of Vantage Creek Holdings. Which meant me. The irony almost made me laugh. The same people who thought they could bully me over bushes and stickers were now tenants, technically renters of community land managed through my company. The plan had been simple: buy out the developer's debt, assume their ownership rights, and quietly take control of the HOA's governing board through a merger clause hidden in fine print. They never even read the clause. Still, I wasn't here for revenge. Not yet. I was here for understanding, to see how power really looked when it thought it was untouchable. 2 days later, the HOA called a mandatory meeting at the clubhouse. I received an email saying, attendance required for all homeowners. Perfect, and I arrived early, taking a seat near the back. The room was filled with the same faces from the neighborhood, Greg at the front, Susan by his side, and a few others whispering among themselves. Greg cleared his throat. Welcome, everyone. We have a few updates about community maintenance fees and enforcement policies. He droned on about landscaping budgets, pool hours, and security patrols. I took notes, not because I needed them, but because it made me look harmless. Then came the moment. Susan stepped forward. Before we close, we need to address one issue: a violation by one of our new homeowners. Her eyes flicked toward me. Miss, Collins, I believe? All heads turned. I looked up calmly. Yes. She smiled tightly. It seems your moving company damaged the sidewalk curb near your driveway. That's a violation of Section 8, Subclause C. The fine is $250. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Greg nodded solemnly, as if delivering a court verdict. I stood slowly. That's interesting, I said, keeping my tone light. Because according to county records, that curb belongs to the HOA's communal property, not to me. Greg frowned. Well, yes, technically, but so you're fining me, I continued, for damage to property that belongs to you. Silence. Someone in the back coughed. Susan's smile faltered. It's just policy. Ah, policy. I nodded thoughtfully. Well, in that case, I'll handle it my way. And with that, I sat back down, my phone buzzing quietly with a notification from my assistant. Transaction complete. Alderwood HOA deed transferred. When the meeting ended, I stayed seated as everyone shuffled out. Greg approached, trying to act casual. Don't take it personally, he said. We treat everyone the same. I'm sure you do, I replied, smiling faintly. But you won't have to worry about that much longer. He frowned. What do you mean? I stood, adjusted my jacket, and walked past him. You'll find out soon enough. Outside, the night air felt cleaner, freer. The streetlights reflected off perfect driveways and identical mailboxes, all symbols of control disguised as order. Morning sunlight spilled through the blinds as my phone buzzed again, a new message from the HOA board. Subject: urgent. Violation notice. I opened it, smiling before I even read the first line. Dear Miss Collins, we've received reports that your front porch lighting exceeds the community's brightness standards. Please replace your bulbs with HOA-approved soft white lamps within 48 hours. It was so petty, it was almost cute. They were desperate to keep their illusion of control. I set my coffee cup down and replied politely. Thank you for the reminder. I'll make sure to handle it accordingly. Then I forwarded the email to my legal team with a single instruction: begin notification. Ownership transition effective today. By the time I stepped outside, a small group of neighbors was already huddled near the mailboxes whispering. They fell silent when they saw me. I gave them my warmest smile, waved, and walked toward my cart. Greg's pickup screeched to stop beside me. Miss Collins. He jumped out, clipboard in hand. You can't ignore HOA directives. If you don't comply, we'll have to escalate. I turned slowly. Escalate? To the board, he said. And possibly to our attorneys. The irony almost made me laugh. That's an interesting idea. Tell you what, why don't you hold off on that for a few hours? There's a board meeting this afternoon you won't want to miss. He frowned, confused. You're not on the board. I gave him a knowing look. Not yet. The HOA clubhouse was a stage waiting for a show. Susan sat at the head of the long mahogany table, pearls gleaming, papers neatly stacked. Greg was at her right, chewing gum nervously. The other 3 board members, retirees with matching smug expressions, whispered among themselves. Susan cleared her throat. Before we begin, we'd like to address several ongoing violations from our new homeowner, Miss Collins. I raised a hand. Actually, before that, there's another item that might come first. Her eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I slid a folder across the table. Official notice of ownership transfer. As of this morning, Alderwood Estates Homeowners Association is now managed under Vantage Creek Holdings. I represent that entity. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Greg laughed, short, nervous. Nice try. You can't buy an HOA. Susan leaned forward. What exactly are you saying? I met her gaze evenly. Your developer sold the unpaid lien and land lease rights months ago. The deed now rests with my company, which means the HOA and every parcel beneath these houses legally falls under our management umbrella. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. You're bluffing, Susan whispered. I shrugged. You'll receive confirmation from the county clerk tomorrow morning. Until then, I suggest you stop issuing fines you can't enforce. Greg stood abruptly, face red. This is outrageous. You can't just walk in here and take over. Greg, I interrupted. You've been delinquent on HOA dues for 3 months. You might want to focus on that first. His mouth fell open. I knew because I'd read every payment ledger. That night, the gossip spread like wildfire. The new girl owns the HOA. No, she's a developer. She's suing everyone. I stayed quiet. Let them guess. Power worked best when it was invisible until it wasn't. By morning, my lawyer confirmed delivery receipts. The county had officially logged the transfer. I was now, in every legal sense, the controlling authority of Alderwood Estates. I drove through the neighborhood slowly, watching as curtains fluttered shut. Greg's truck was gone from his driveway. Susan's manicured lawn looked a little less perfect today. Halfway down Maple Drive, a young couple waved nervously. Miss Collins, the woman called out. Is it true? You own the place now. I smiled. Not the place, exactly. Just the paperwork that keeps it running. The husband shifted uneasily. Does that mean our dues won't change? I said quickly. Unless you're on the board. They both laughed awkwardly. I didn't. By week's end, Greg and Susan requested an emergency session. I agreed. But this time, I brought my own folder of surprises. Susan began defensively. You may have legal ownership on paper, but the board still governs community policy. We answer to residents, not to corporations. I flipped open my folder. You're right. Except this board failed to renew its charter 3 years ago, which nullifies all voting authority. You've been operating on expired bylaws. Greg's pen clattered to the table. That's impossible. It's public record, I said. You just never checked. Susan swallowed hard. What do you want from us? Nothing, I said simply. Keep doing your job. Only now you'll report to my management office. Payroll will arrive on the 1st of each month. Greg blinked. Payroll? Yes, I smiled. You'll all be paid for continuing community operations as my employees. The look on their faces was priceless. They weren't fired. They were hired. Their empire of fines had become my staff. The weeks that followed were deliciously quiet. No more violation letters. No more surprise inspections. Residents noticed the difference. I instituted real improvements, repainting the cracked tennis courts, trimming the neglected lake trail, reducing monthly fees by 15%. Neighbors who once whispered now waved. Some even brought cookies. They didn't realize the HOA's budget had been bloated by years of unnecessary administrative costs, mostly Greg's personal gas reimbursements and Susan's consulting fees. I eliminated those, redirected funds to maintenance, and quietly balanced the books. But power attracts resentment. One evening, as I was reviewing reports, my phone buzzed again, an anonymous text. Watch your back. Greg's planning something. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I already knew. The next morning, Greg called an unofficial neighborhood meeting without notifying. I parked across the street and listened from outside the community center window. He stood at the podium, pacing like a preacher. She's not one of us, he shouted. She's a corporate plant here to take over our homes. We can fight this. We can file an injunction. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Susan spoke next, quieter but sharper. She reduced fees now, but wait. Soon she'll raise them tenfold. That's how they trap you. We need to show resistance before it's too late. I smiled to myself. Resistance. How predictable that I stepped inside. The room froze. If anyone's planning a coup, I said softly. At least use the correct email chain. Gasps. Someone actually dropped a coffee cup. I walked calmly to the front, meeting Greg's furious glare. You know, Greg, I admire your passion. You've spent years enforcing rules. But tell me, who enforces them on you? He said nothing. I held up a document. Thick, official. This is a termination notice. Effective immediately, your services as compliance officer are no longer required. You'll receive severance, of course. You're free to stay in your home as long as your rent is current. His face drained of color. Rent. I smiled. Yes, rent. You didn't think the land was free, did you? The crowd murmured. Susan stood up, trembling. You can't do this. I turned to her. Actually, I can. And I already have. I handed her an envelope. Inside was her new contract, community relations consultant. Lower pay, same pearls. I turned to the residents. You've been led by people who saw this neighborhood as their kingdom. I see it as a community. You don't owe me loyalty, just fairness. No more petty fines, no more intimidation. Just peace. For a long moment, no one moved. Then an elderly man in the back started clapping. Then another. Within seconds, the room filled with hesitant, relieved applause. Greg stormed out. Susan followed, shaking. I stood there, heart steady. Power didn't need to shout. It just needed to stand its ground. That night, I drove to the lake again. The reflection of the streetlights rippled across the water like a calm after a storm. My phone buzzed. A new text from an unknown number. You've made enemies. Be careful who you trust. I stared at it for a while, then deleted it. Let them hate. Let them plot, because by tomorrow, I wouldn't just own their land, I'd own their silence. Be why tomorrow morning, those symbols would answer to me. The morning sun painted the community gold. Birds chirped, sprinklers hissed, and yet, something about the air felt off. Rebecca stepped out of her temporary rental, a small modern house near the lake, with a steaming mug of coffee in hand. She took a sip, gazing at the rows of near-identical homes stretching into the distance. Perfect lawns. Perfect driveways. Perfect lies. She'd been quiet for 2 days, observing. The HOA had tightened their control. Notices appeared on her mailbox daily. Noise complaints, grass too long, unregistered vehicle. Each one printed in the same smug tone, and every time she read them, Rebecca smiled, because the HOA had no idea who she really was. At exactly, a sharp knock hit her door. 3 board members, led by Sandra, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, stood outside, holding clipboards like weapons. Sandra wore her authority like perfume, thick, overbearing, and impossible to ignore. Good morning, Rebecca, she began, lips tight. We noticed your front porch light doesn't match the community standard. It must be replaced immediately. Rebecca sipped her coffee. Is that so? Yes, Sandra continued. And another thing, your vehicle. It's not registered with our security database. HOA rules require. Rebecca interrupted gently. Sandra, how long have you lived here? Sandra blinked. Excuse me? 8 years. Rebecca guessed. And yet you never checked who owns this land, did you? The board members exchanged confused glances. Rebecca placed her coffee down, leaned against the doorframe, and said calmly, You're standing on property I own. Every inch of it. They laughed, at first. Sandra even clutched her clipboard to her chest as if holding in disbelief. That's impossible, she said. This land belongs to Crescent Ridge Development LLC. We pay our dues to them. Rebecca tilted her head. And who do you think owns Crescent Ridge? Silence. Rebecca smiled. I bought the company 2 weeks ago. The wind seemed to pause. Even the birds went quiet. Sandra's confidence cracked for the first time. You bought it? Rebecca nodded. The entire HOA's parent company. You see, I don't just collect rent. I collect control. Later that day, chaos rippled through the HOA board. Emergency meetings. Emails. Late-night calls. Rebecca sat at her desk, laptop open, watching the panic unfold through security feeds. She had installed them quietly, legally. After acquiring the property rights one by one, she watched board members crumble under the realization. Their authority was gone. All those years of intimidation, the fines, the petty rules, the abuse of power, were now turning against them, and Rebecca was just getting started. 2 days later, she hosted an HOA restructuring meeting in the community center. Everyone was required to attend. Sandra and her allies arrived first, visibly nervous. They expected confrontation, maybe even legal retaliation, but Rebecca greeted them with a calm, professional smile. "Good evening, everyone," she said, standing before a projector screen displaying the words, "New management. New vision." Her voice was soft but unshakable. "For years, this HOA operated through fear," she said. "But that ends tonight. I'm implementing transparency, fairness, and accountability for the first time." The crowd murmured. Some were skeptical, others relieved. Sandra, however, glared. "You think you can just waltz in and take over?" she hissed. Rebecca's smile didn't fade. "I already did." As Rebecca spoke, her assistant handed out new ownership documents, legally binding contracts that placed the community directly under her management. Sandra's hands trembled as she read the fine print. It was airtight. Rebecca continued, walking slowly across the room. "You fined a man for parking his truck outside his house because it wasn't aesthetic," she said. "You evicted a single mother over a mailbox color. You turned community into compliance." Her eyes met Sandra's. "Now it's my turn to restore what you destroyed." By midnight, it was done, Sandra, and the board were stripped of power. New elections were scheduled. The residents, for the first time in years, had a voice, but Rebecca wasn't doing this just for revenge. She remembered her father, a humble contractor, who lost his home years ago to an HOA like this one. They'd called his trailer unsightly. They'd fined him until he couldn't pay. He died still fighting for fairness. Rebecca built her empire so no one like him would ever be powerless again. Weeks later, Crescent Ridge looked different. Lawns weren't uniform, they were alive. Kids played outside without fear of noise violations. People smiled when they saw each other, and on the gate that once bore the HOA's logo, a new sign gleamed, Crescent Ridge, owned by the people. Rebecca stood by her truck, the same one Sandra once called an eyesore. She touched the steering wheel and whispered, "For you, Dad." Then she drove down the same road the HOA once tried to block, now free, open, and hers in every sense of the word. The neighborhood looked different now, not because the houses had changed, but because the energy had. For months, Willow Creek had been under siege by its own HOA. Fear disguised as order, rules pretending to be protection. But now, under Rebecca Hale's quiet leadership, the air was lighter, cleaner. She stood in the middle of the community park, the one that had been under renovation for nearly 3 years, and watched the new benches being installed. Children were playing again. The laughter was real this time. Lydia walked over, clipboard in hand. "Final invoices approved," she said softly. "Playgrounds fully funded. No more delays." Rebecca nodded. "Good. Let's keep everything transparent. No more hidden consulting fees." Lydia smiled faintly. "You'll never let me forget that, will you?" Rebecca's lips curved into a smirk. "Not until the last dollar's accounted for." They both laughed quietly. Two women who had once been enemies, now rebuilding something stronger than control. Trust. The news breaks by midweek. A local newspaper headline caught everyone's attention. Developer rebuilds HOA from within, turns scandal into model of accountability. The article featured a photo of Rebecca and Lydia shaking hands in front of the newly opened community park. Michael called later that afternoon. "You've got journalists asking for interviews," he said. "Apparently you're the HOA whisperer." Now Rebecca laughed. "I prefer landlord of reason." "You're making them nervous," Michael teased. "Other HOAs in the region are talking about reforming their boards. Guess you started a trend." "I didn't start a trend," she said, glancing at the park outside her office window. "I just reminded people that power doesn't have to mean punishment." A visit from the county. A few days later, 2 county inspectors arrived, part of a formal audit Rebecca herself had requested months ago. The older inspector flipped through documents as the younger one looked around, impressed by the transformation. "You know," the senior inspector said, "I've seen a lot of these communities fall apart when corruption surfaces. You managed to stabilize yours in record time." Rebecca shrugged. "It's easy when people stop pretending the HOA is a kingdom." He chuckled. "You'd be surprised how many think it is." Before leaving, he handed her a signed clearance form. "Everything checks out. Willow Creek is officially compliant and cleared of pending investigations." When they drove away, Rebecca stood for a long moment, the paper in her hand fluttering in the wind. The battle was over. The past comes knocking that evening. As the sun set over the rolling hills beyond the neighborhood, Rebecca sat by the window with a glass of wine. The reflection in the glass caught her attention. Her younger self, the girl who once struggled to pay rent, the woman who built an empire from the ground up. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from a number she hadn't seen in years. "Mom said you're running an HOA now." Who would have thought? James. Her younger brother. The one who used to mock her for wasting time managing rental homes. The one who had left town when their father's business failed. She smiled softly and replaced, "Not running one. Rebuilding one. And you." After a moment, trying to start over, "Could use some advice." Rebecca typed, "BA, come by Willow Creek sometime. I'll show you what starting over really looks like." She put her phone down, eyes misting slightly. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the weight of everything she'd fought for, and won a quiet victory. Weeks later, the first community barbecue was held under the new resident council banner. There were no suits, no speeches, just laughter, music, and neighbors finally talking like people instead of factions. Rebecca sat at a picnic table with Lydia, George, and a few others. Smoke from the grill swirled lazily through the evening air. "Do you ever miss the fight?" Lydia asked. Rebecca smiled. "No. I prefer peace that I built myself." George handed her a plate of ribs. "You know, when you first showed up, I thought you were just another landlord. Didn't think you'd turn this place upside down." Rebecca raised her glass. "Sometimes that's the only way to set things right." The crowd around them cheered as a group of kids ran past with sparklers. The park lights flickered on, painting the scene in soft gold. Rebecca looked up at the sky, clear, open, limitless. For the first time, she wasn't fighting anyone. She was just home. 6 months, Laterra's sleek black car pulled up to the same street where everything began. A "for sale" sign stood on the old HOA office lawn, replaced by a new plaque. Willow Creek Community Development Group, founded by Rebecca Hale. Inside, the office had been converted into a community workspace. Free Wi-Fi, open desks, coffee machines, and a mural that read, "We rise by building others." Lydia now managed the operations team. George oversaw maintenance. And Rebecca? She had expanded 4 other neighborhoods under her company's wing, all restructured into fair, transparent councils. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman the HOA tried to trap was now the reason HOAs across the county were being rewritten. When a journalist came by to film a short segment, she asked, "What would you say to people who think they can't fight back against unfair systems?" Rebecca smiled, eyes steady on the camera. "You don't fight fire with fire. You fight it with ownership. Own your voice. Own your choices. And when possible," she paused, smirking, "own the land." Cinematic ending scene visual, sunset over Willow Creek. Slow aerial shot zooming out. Narration, Rebecca's voice. "They tried to trick me the minute I arrived. But they forgot one thing. You can't fool someone who built the foundation you're standing on." Cut to Rebecca closing the office door, locking it, and walking down the road lined with blooming trees. "Now, every rent check they once demanded comes straight to me." Camera pans up as the golden sun dips below the horizon. In the end, peace isn't given. It's earned and owned. Screen fades to black. Soft instrumental outro.